The message arrived on a Tuesday, which was already suspicious enough. Nothing good ever happened on Tuesdays in the Outer Rim territories, and Darren Calder had learned to trust his instincts about these things. He was halfway through negotiating a shipment of Terran whiskey to a Rigelian merchant when his neural implant buzzed with an urgent priority override. Death notification, the synthetic voice announced directly into his auditory cortex. Kale Saris, Prince of the Third Theixian Dynasty, has been confirmed deceased. You are listed as primary beneficiary. The bottle of whiskey slipped from Darren's fingers, shattering against the metal floor of the trading post. The Rigelian merchant's four eyes widened in alarm, but Darren barely noticed. Kale was dead, his brother in all but blood. The one person in this entire galaxy who'd given a damn about a washed-up human soldier turned smuggler was gone. How? Darren managed to croak out, ignoring the confused chittering of the merchant. Assassination via neurotoxin at the Theixian Royal Court. Time of death 3 standard days ago. Your presence is required for the reading of the will within 48 hours, or all assets will be forfeit to the Theixian state. Darren stumbled out of the trading post, his mind reeling. Kale had saved his life during the Proxima campaign 8 years ago, when humanity was still trying to prove it deserved a seat at the galactic table. They'd fought side by side against the Void Reapers, and somehow, against all odds and social conventions, they'd become friends, a human and a Theixian prince, brothers forged in the crucible of war. The journey to Thixis Prime took 36 hours through hyperspace, giving Darren plenty of time to remember and grieve. He sat in the cramped cabin of his transport ship, nursing a bottle of that same Terran whiskey he'd been trying to sell, watching the kaleidoscope of colors stream past the viewport. Kale had been larger than life in every sense, standing nearly 8 feet tall with the characteristic blue-silver skin of his species. He'd moved through the galaxy like he owned it, which technically he partially did. The Theixians controlled 30% of known space, their technology so advanced that most species could barely comprehend it. And yet Kale had seen something in humanity, something worth defending. You humans, Kyle had said once, after they'd barely survived an ambush. You're insane. Your technology is primitive, your lifespan's pathetically short, and you pick fights with species that could vaporize your homeworld. And yet you keep winning. How? Spite. Mostly, Darren had replied, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. We're too stubborn to know when we're beaten. Kale had laughed, a sound like crystalline bells breaking. I think I'll keep you around, Darren Calder. You make eternity less boring. Now eternity would have to be boring without him. Thixis Prime loomed before him as the transport dropped out of hyperspace, a jewel of a world wrapped in ribbons of light. The orbital cities floated like geometric dreams, connected by streams of energy that defied human understanding of physics. Darren had been here twice before, both times as Kale's guest, and both times he'd felt like a child wandering through a museum of impossibilities. The spaceport authorities were expecting him, which was the first sign that something was wrong. Theixians didn't expect humans. They barely tolerated them. But here he was, being escorted by a full honor guard through corridors that hummed with barely contained power, past other Theixians, who watched him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed disgust. The Palace of Eternal Harmonics rose from the center of the capital city, like a frozen explosion of crystal and light. Darren had to close his eyes against the sensory overload as the honor guard led him through the main gates. Everything here was designed for Theixian perception, which included spectrums of light and sound that human senses couldn't fully process. The throne room had been converted into something resembling a courtroom. Hundreds of Theixians filled the crystalline galleries, their bioluminescent skin creating a constellation of blue-white stars in the vast space. At the center, on a raised dais, stood 3 figures. The first was Lord Zorath, whom Darren recognized from news feeds. The Thixian noble was everything Cale hadn't been: traditional, rigid, with skin that gleamed like polished chrome, and eyes that held all the warmth of deep space. He stood with the bearing of someone who expected the universe to rearrange itself for his convenience. The second was a Thixian legal advocate, thin and ancient, with skin so pale it was almost translucent. The third made Darren's breath catch in his throat. Valera Saurus stood like a statue carved from moonlight and sorrow. Even among the ethereal beauty of the Thixians, she was extraordinary. Her skin held a subtle pearl essence that seemed to shift with her emotions, currently cycling through deep blues and violets of grief. Her eyes, large and multifaceted like cut gems, fixed on Darren with an expression he couldn't read. He'd met her once before, at a state dinner, where Cale had introduced them with typical dramatic flair. She'd been polite but distant, clearly seeing him as just another of her husband's eccentric hobbies. Collecting primitive species seemed to be something of a trend among the Thixian nobility. "Darren Calder." The legal advocate's voice resonated through the chamber, somehow making his name sound like an insult. "You have been summoned for the reading of Prince Cale Saurus's final will and testament." Darren stepped forward, acutely aware of how small and crude he must look in his worn flight jacket and cargo pants. "I'm here." "Before we proceed," Lord Zorath interrupted, his voice like grinding metal, "I must lodge a formal protest. This human has no standing in Thixian law. Whatever promises Prince Cale made in his deteriorating mental state should be considered void." The prince's mental state was verified as sound by 3 independent neural authenticators. The advocate replied, without emotion. "The will is binding." "Then read it," Valera said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Darren's chest ache. "Let us be done with this charade." The advocate waved a hand, and holographic text appeared in the air, shifting between Thixian script and translated standard. "I, Cale Saurus, Prince of the Third Dynasty, holder of the Eternal Flame, defender of the outer reaches, being of sound mind and spark, do hereby declare my final wishes." The room fell silent except for the low hum of the palace's power systems. "To my beloved wife, Valera, I leave my devotion beyond death and my deepest apologies for what I must ask of you. To my sword brother, Darren Calder, I leave the burden of my trust and the weight of my hope." Darren frowned. This was starting to sound less like a will and more like one of Cale's dramatic speeches. The galaxy stands upon the edge of change. The old ways strangle progress, and those who would maintain them will stop at nothing to preserve their power. I have seen my death approaching in the shadows of the court, and I have prepared accordingly. Murmurs rippled through the galleries. Lord Zorath's expression had turned from disdain to calculation. "Therefore, I invoke the right of continuation, as established in the first codex of Thixian law. My estate, my titles, and my obligations pass not to the state, not to my dynasty, but to my chosen heir through the bond of alliance." The advocate paused, as if gathering courage for what came next. "Darren Calder will marry Valera Saurus within 3 days of this reading, thereby becoming Prince Regent of the Third Dynasty. This union will secure my wife's protection and ensure my fortune serves its intended purpose, the advancement of human Thixian cooperation and the prevention of war." The throne room erupted. Thixians never shouted, but their voices rose in harmonics that made the crystal walls sing in protest. Lord Zorath stepped forward, his skin flashing angry reds and oranges. "This is absurd. A human cannot marry a Thixian. The biological impossibility alone." "The law says nothing about biological compatibility," the advocate interrupted. "Only legal union is required." Darren felt the world spinning around him. "Wait, what I have to marry?" He looked at Valera, whose expression had gone from grief to fury to something unreadable. "This is insane. Cale wouldn't—" There is more, the advocate continued, raising his voice above the chaos. The room gradually quieted, though the tension remained thick enough to cut. Should either party refuse this union, or should the marriage not be completed within the prescribed time, all of Prince Kael's assets will be liquidated and donated to the War Orphans Fund. Furthermore, Lady Valera's protection under royal privilege will be revoked, and she will be subject to standard inheritance challenges. Darren saw Valera's skin, pale to almost white. Standard inheritance challenges was a polite way of saying she'd be dead within a week. Without Kael's protection, his enemies would tear her apart to get at what remained of his power base. Additionally, the advocate continued, Darren Calder has been preemptively granted Theoxian citizenship, effective immediately, with all rights and protections thereof. Any attempt on his life will be considered an act of treason against the crown. That explained the honor guard. Kael had thought of everything. I need a drink, Darren muttered. You need more than that, human, Zorath said, stepping closer. Despite the legal protection, Darren felt very small as the 8-foot-tall alien loomed over him. You're being used as a pawn in a game you cannot possibly understand. Walk away now, and I will ensure you leave this system alive and wealthy. Tempting offer, Darren said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. But I've got a question first. Who killed Kael? Zorath's expression didn't change, but his skin flickered with patterns too quick for human eyes to fully track. The investigation is ongoing. Right, ongoing. Darren turned to Valera. What do you think about all this? Your Highness. She moved toward him with the fluid grace of a predator, and Darren had to force himself not to step back. Up close, he could see the fractal patterns in her eyes, the way her skin seemed to hold starlight beneath its surface. I think, she said slowly, that my husband has left us both in an impossible position. You are human. I am Thixian. Our species have been at odds since your kind crawled out of your gravity well and demanded to be recognized as sapient. We're charming like that, Darren agreed. And yet, she continued, studying him with those impossible eyes, Kael chose you. He trusted you with my life and his legacy. The question is whether you are worthy of that trust. I'm a smuggler, Darren said bluntly. I run illegal cargo through systems where humans aren't supposed to be. I drink too much. I've got a ship held together with prayer and duct tape, and the longest relationship I've ever had was with a bottle of whiskey. I'm nobody's idea of prince material. Perhaps that's exactly why he chose you, Valera said. You have no political ambitions, no connections to the great houses, no reason to want power except to honor a friend's memory. This is ridiculous, Zorath interjected. The Council will never recognize this union. The biological surveys alone will prove... A new voice cut through the argument, young and sharp with fear. Your Highness Lord Zorath, the palace is under attack. A young Thixian guard materialized in the doorway, his skin flashing urgent patterns of alarm. Before anyone could respond, the lights went out. Emergency bioluminescence flared from every Thixian in the room, turning the darkness into an alien constellation. Darren couldn't see more than shadows and suggestions of movement, but his other senses kicked into overdrive. The hum of the palace's power had stopped. The air felt different, charged with potential violence. Then came the sound of energy weapons firing. Protection formation, someone shouted in Thixian, and Darren felt himself being grabbed and pulled backward. Valera's hand was on his arm, her touch sending strange sensations through his nervous system, like static electricity made of starlight. Stay close to me, she hissed. If you die before we marry, we lose everything. Romantic, Darren muttered, pulling the compact plasma pistol from his jacket. It was illegal as hell on Thixis Prime, but Kael had taught him that laws were more like guidelines when your life was on the line. The throne room erupted into chaos. Energy beams lit up the darkness in brilliant blues and greens, refracting off the crystal walls in dizzying patterns. Darren could barely track what was happening, but his combat instincts kicked in. These weren't random terrorists or political dissidents. The attack pattern was too coordinated, too professional. "Military tactics," he said to Valera. "Someone with training is leading this." "Zorath's people?" she asked, pulling him behind an overturned crystalline bench as energy fire sizzled overhead. "Maybe. Or someone who wants us to think that." A figure in black combat armor materialized out of the darkness, weapon raised toward them. Darren didn't think, just acted. 3 shots center mass, the plasma bolts punching through the armor with brutal efficiency. The figure dropped, and in the brief flare of light, Darren saw the armor was Thixian military issue. "That's not good," he muttered. More figures were pouring into the throne room, and the palace guards were falling back. Whatever this was, it had been planned carefully. Take out the power, attack during the will reading when everyone would be gathered in one place. Use military-grade equipment to overwhelm the defenses. "We need to move," Darren said. "Is there another way out of here?" "The prince's private passage," Valera said. "But it's sealed to everyone except family." "Good thing we're getting married then." Darren grabbed her hand. "Which way?" She hesitated for a moment. Then her skin flared with determination. "Follow me, and try not to die, human." They ran through the chaos, Valera's bioluminescence providing just enough light for Darren to avoid tripping over bodies and debris. The attackers seemed focused on the main group of nobles, which gave them a few precious seconds of cover. The passage entrance was hidden behind what looked like a solid wall of crystal. Valera pressed her hand against it, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then she grabbed Darren's hand and pressed it against the same spot. "By the right of continuation," she said in Thixian, "I acknowledge this one as heir." The wall dissolved like mist, revealing a corridor beyond. They dove through just as energy fire erupted behind them, the wall reforming and sealing them in darkness. "Well," Darren said, catching his breath. "That was exciting." "That was an assassination attempt," Valera corrected. "On both of us. Someone doesn't want this marriage to happen." "You think?" Darren activated the emergency light on his plasma pistol, illuminating Valera's face in its harsh white glare. "Your husband really knew how to make an exit, didn't he? Dies mysteriously, leaves a will that makes me a target. And now, we're running for our lives through secret passages. This is exactly the kind of Tuesday I was trying to avoid." "Tuesday?" Valera asked, confused. "Human thing. Never mind." Darren looked down the corridor, which stretched into darkness. "Where does this lead?" "The old sanctuary. It's been sealed for centuries, but Kale maintained it as an emergency shelter. There should be supplies, communications equipment, and a separate power source." They started walking, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space. Darren could feel the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He'd come here to say goodbye to a friend, and now he was running for his life with an alien princess he was supposed to marry. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a few minutes of silence. "You may ask." "Did you love him, Kale? I mean—" Valera was quiet for so long that Darren thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried harmonics of deep sadness. "Our marriage was arranged when we were children. I barely knew him when we wed. But over time, yes, I came to love him. He was brilliant, passionate, infuriating. He believed the galaxy could be better than it is, that the old hatreds and divisions could be overcome." "Sounds like him," Darren agreed. "He saved my life. You know, not just in battle, but after. I was ready to eat a plasma bolt after the war. Couldn't find a reason to keep going. Then this giant blue alien shows up at my door with a bottle of Terran whiskey and says, 'You're going to help me change the galaxy.' Just like that, like it was already decided. And you followed him. What else was I going to do? He was the only person in the galaxy who thought a washed-up human soldier was worth anything. They reached a heavy door marked with ancient Theixian symbols. Valera pressed her hand against another scanner, and it cycled open with a hiss of stale air. The room beyond was a mixture of ancient architecture and modern technology, with supplies stacked along one wall and communication equipment humming with standby power. "We should be safe here for now," Valera said, moving to the communication console. "I need to contact the loyal houses, find out who's behind the attack. And figure out if we're actually going through with this marriage thing," Darren added, slumping into a chair that was definitely not designed for human anatomy. Valera turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "You would refuse? Would you blame me 24 hours ago? I was negotiating whiskey trades in the Outer Rim. Now I'm supposed to become alien royalty to honor my dead friend's completely insane last wishes. Oh, and people are trying to kill us. This is a lot to process." "And yet you're here," she observed. "You could have run when the attack started. Could have let them kill me and walked away from all of this." "Yeah, well," Darren scratched the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd never been able to break. "Kale saved my life. Least I can do is try to save his widow's, even if she is looking at me like I'm something she scraped off her shoe." "I do not wear shoes," Valera said with complete seriousness, and despite everything, Darren laughed. "It's an expression. It means—" "Never mind." He leaned back in the uncomfortable chair, exhaustion hitting him like a gravity wave. "So, what happens now? We hide here until the 3 days are up and lose everything, or we go back out there and probably get murdered." "Neither," Valera said, turning back to the console. "We follow Kale's plan. Which is, I don't know yet. But my husband was many things, and spontaneous was not one of them. He planned this, all of it. The will, the marriage requirement, even the attack. I suspect. You think Kale knew someone would try to kill us? I think Kale counted on it. He needed to know who his enemies were, and what better way to draw them out than to create a crisis." She pulled up a holographic display showing the palace layout. "Look at this. The attackers knew exactly where to hit, exactly when we'd all be gathered. This required inside information." "Zorath. Possibly. Or someone using him as cover." She manipulated the display, highlighting patterns in the attack. "But there's something else. The timing is too perfect. They attacked the moment the will was read, before anyone could have communicated outside the throne room." Darren stood up, moving to look at the display more closely. "Unless they already knew what the will said." "Exactly. Which means either Kale told them or there's a leak in the legal advocate's office." Darren traced the attack pattern with his finger. "Military precision, inside information, perfect timing. This isn't just about stopping our marriage. This is a coup." Valera's skin flashed with surprise. "You understand Theixian politics?" "I understand military tactics. Politics is just war by other means, right?" He studied the display. "They're not just trying to kill us. They're trying to destroy any legitimacy we might have. Make it look like the marriage was coerced or that we're not worthy of Kale's trust. For a primitive human, you're surprisingly perceptive." "Thanks, I think—" Darren turned to face her. "So what do we do about it?" Before Valera could answer, the communication console flared to life. A figure materialized in the holographic display, and Darren's hand went immediately to his weapon. But it wasn't an attacker. It was Kale. Or rather, a recording of Kale, looking exactly as Darren remembered him, tall, imposing, with that slight smile that suggested he knew something you didn't. "Hello, Darren. Hello. My beloved Valera. If you're seeing this, then 3 things have happened. First, I'm dead, which is unfortunate but not unexpected. Second, you've both survived the initial attack, which means you're working together. Good. Third, you've made it to the sanctuary, which means you're smarter than our enemies give you credit for. Kyle, Valera whispered, her skin cycling through colors of grief and longing. I know this is difficult. The recording continued. I know I'm asking the impossible of both of you. A human and a Theixian. Married, the scandal alone will shake the foundations of the Empire. But that's exactly what needs to happen. The hologram shifted, showing star charts and political diagrams. The galaxy is changing. Humanity's rise has disrupted the old order, and there are those who would rather see both our species burn than accept that change. Lord Zorath is one of them, but he's not the real threat. There's something coming, something that will require human creativity and Theixian technology working together to survive. Cryptic as always, Darren muttered. Darren, the recording said, as if responding to him, I chose you not because you're the best human, but because you're the right human. You have no political ambitions, no delusions of grandeur, just a stubborn refusal to give up when things get impossible. You're going to need that. Valera, my love, I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted, what you deserved, but you're stronger than you know, and smarter than our enemies suspect. Trust Darren. He may be crude and primitive, but he's also loyal beyond reason and cleverer than he pretends to be. Thanks, I think, Darren said again. The marriage must happen within 3 days, but not for the reasons stated in the will. There's a provision in Theixian law, older than the Empire itself, the Unity Clause. When two houses join through marriage during a time of crisis, they can call for immediate recognition from the Council, bypassing normal procedures. But it only works if the marriage happens while under direct threat. Which is why you knew they'd attack, Valera said, understanding dawning in her voice. I've left you the tools you need. In the Sanctuary's vault, you'll find weapons, documents, and something special for each of you. Use them wisely. The next 72 hours will determine not just your survival, but the future of both our species. The recording began to fade. One more thing. Darren, take care of her. Valera, don't kill him for being human. And both of you, trust each other. It's the only way you'll survive what's coming. The hologram disappeared, leaving them in the dim light of the emergency systems. Your husband, Darren said after a moment, was a manipulative genius. Yes, Valera agreed. He was... They stood in silence for a moment, processing everything they'd learned. Then Valera moved to a section of wall that looked identical to every other section and pressed her hand against it. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a small vault. Inside were 2 items. The first was a weapon unlike anything Darren had ever seen, a fusion of human and Theixian technology that hummed with barely contained power. The second was a datapad containing what looked like military deployment schedules and classified government documents. Kyle's insurance policy, Valera said, picking up the datapad. This is evidence of a conspiracy going back years. Zorath isn't working alone. He has allies in the military, the government, even off-world. And now we have proof, Darren said, hefting the hybrid weapon. It felt right in his hands, perfectly balanced despite its alien components. The question is, what do we do with it? We survive the next 3 days, Valera said firmly. We complete the marriage, invoke the Unity Clause, and present this evidence to the Council. But first, we need allies of our own. Any friends we can trust? A few. Houses that owed Kale favors. Others who oppose Zorath's traditionalist faction. But reaching them means leaving the sanctuary, which means going back out there where people are trying to kill us. Yes. Darren checked the power cell on his plasma pistol, then examined the hybrid weapon more closely. It appeared to be some kind of energy rifle, but with modifications he couldn't quite understand. You know, he said. When I woke up this morning, The biggest decision I had to make was whether to have one drink or two with breakfast. Now I'm planning a counter-revolution with an alien princess I'm supposed to marry. Do you always talk this much when you're nervous? Valera asked. Pretty much. Yeah. It's either that or scream. And screaming seems counterproductive right now. Despite everything. Valera's skin shimmered with what Darren was starting to recognize as amusement. Kale said you were unconventional. That's a polite way of putting it. He stood up, checking his equipment one more time. So, Your Highness, ready to go save the galaxy? It's just 2 species, not the entire galaxy, she corrected. Got to start somewhere. He moved toward the door, then paused. One question, though. This marriage thing, it's just political. Right, I mean. We're not expected to. Valera's skin flushed with colors Darren couldn't interpret. The marriage must be legal and binding. What happens after that is negotiable. Negotiable. Right. Good to know. He activated the hybrid weapon, which hummed to life with a sound like singing crystal. Let's go get married then. How hard could it be? As if in answer, an explosion rocked the sanctuary, and the lights went out again. You had to ask, Valera said in the darkness. Yeah, Darren agreed, raising his weapon toward the door as he heard the distinctive sound of cutting tools working on the metal. I really need to learn when to keep my mouth shut. The door began to glow cherry red as the cutting tools worked their way through. Darren and Valera took position behind whatever cover they could find, weapons raised. Any last words before we probably die? Darren asked. Yes, Valera said, her skin beginning to glow with battle readiness. If we survive this, you're buying the drinks.
Deal.
The door exploded inward, and the sanctuary filled with smoke and fire. Through the chaos came armored figures, weapons blazing. Darren squeezed the trigger of the hybrid weapon, and a beam of pure destruction lanced out, cutting through armor and walls alike. The battle for their lives and the future of 2 species had begun. The hybrid weapon carved through the attackers like a hot knife through butter, but they kept coming. Darren counted at least 12 hostiles, all wearing military-grade armor with no identifying marks. Professional mercenaries, not palace guards gone rogue. Left flank, Valera shouted, her own weapon singing as it discharged. The Theixian princess moved with lethal grace, her bioluminescent skin shifting to combat patterns that seemed to confuse the attackers' targeting systems. Darren rolled behind an overturned supply crate as energy bolts sizzled past his head. The hybrid weapon was powerful, but had a slow recharge rate. He needed to make every shot count. We can't hold this position, he yelled over the din of combat. The emergency tunnel, Valera, pointed to a maintenance hatch in the floor. It leads to the old transit system. You first, Darren laid down covering fire, the hybrid weapons beam cutting through 2 more attackers. Valera didn't argue. She dove for the hatch, her fingers flying over the lock mechanism. It hissed open, just as a grenade rolled into the sanctuary. Move! Darren grabbed Valera and pulled them both into the tunnel as the explosion turned their former shelter into superheated debris. They fell about 10 feet, landing hard on rusted metal grating. The tunnel was pitch black except for Valera's natural glow and the emergency lights on Darren's weapon. Water dripped from corroded pipes, and the air smelled of centuries of neglect. The old transit system hasn't been used in 300 years, Valera said, pulling herself to her feet. But it connects to every major district in the capital. Great. A tour of the sewers while being hunted by assassins. This day just keeps getting better. Darren checked his weapon's power cell. 30% remaining. Not good. They started moving through the tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. Above them, they could hear the attackers breaching the sanctuary, shouting in a language Darren didn't recognize. That's not Theixian, he observed. No, it's Corvani. Mercenaries from the outer systems. Valera's expression darkened. Expensive mercenaries. Whoever hired them has significant resources. They traveled in tense silence for several minutes, taking turns at random to throw off pursuit. The tunnel system was a maze of interconnected passages, some large enough to stand in, others requiring them to crawl through rust and accumulated grime. "Tell me about the Unity Clause," Darren said as they paused to catch their breath. "Your husband's message mentioned it, but I'm not exactly up to date on ancient Thixian law." "It dates back to the foundation of the Empire," Valera explained, her voice echoing softly in the confined space. "When the first dynasties were forming, there were constant wars between houses. The Unity Clause was created as a way to force peace. If two houses joined during active conflict, their union superseded all other claims and challenges. It was meant to incentivize alliance over warfare. But it hasn't been used in centuries. Not successfully. The requirements are very specific. The marriage must occur during a documented threat to both parties, witnessed by at least 3 neutral observers of noble standing, and consummated within the traditional time frame." Darren nearly tripped over a pipe. Consummated, nobody mentioned that part. Valera's skin flushed with colors he was beginning to recognize as embarrassment. "It's a formality. The law requires biological confirmation of the union." "Biological confirmation. Right." Darren ran a hand through his hair, which was now caked with rust and dust. "And how exactly does that work between a human and a Thixian?" "I have no idea," Valera admitted. "To my knowledge, it's never been attempted." "Of course it hasn't, because that would be too easy." A sound from behind made them both freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving fast. "They're tracking us," Valera whispered. "How these tunnels should block most scanning technology. Unless they have biological trackers. During the marriage announcement, anyone could have tagged us with nanomarkers." Darren cursed under his breath. "We need to get to the surface, find allies. The nearest exit leads to the Commerce District. House Malik has holdings there. They were loyal to Kale. Then that's where we go." They picked up the pace, moving as quickly as they could through the deteriorating tunnels. The footsteps behind them were getting closer. Darren could hear voices now, coordinating their pursuit. The exit was a rusted ladder, leading up to a sealed hatch. Valera climbed first, her fingers working on the lock, while Darren watched their 6. The first pursuer rounded the corner just as the hatch popped open. "Go! Go! Go!" Darren fired 3 shots from his plasma pistol, forcing the mercenaries to take cover, then scrambled up the ladder after Valera. They emerged in an alley, between 2 towering crystal structures. The Commerce District was bustling with activity, thousands of Thixians going about their business, unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. "This way." Valera led him through the crowd, her royal bearing causing most citizens to step aside automatically. But Darren noticed the looks they were getting. A human and a Thixian princess together was unusual enough to draw attention. "We're too exposed," he said. "House Malik's compound is just ahead." Valera pointed to an elegant structure that seemed to be grown rather than built, its organic curves covered in bioluminescent vegetation. They were halfway there when the shooting started. Energy bolts lanced through the crowd, sending civilians screaming in all directions. Darren tackled Valera behind a vendor's stall as merchandise exploded around them. "They're not even trying to be subtle anymore," he observed, returning fire. "They don't need to be. If we die here, it will look like a terrorist attack. Zorath can claim the marriage was prevented by enemies of the state." A squad of palace guards appeared, but instead of helping, they opened fire on both Darren and the mercenaries. "Great. Now everyone's trying to kill us." "The corruption runs deeper than we thought," Valera said grimly. She pulled something from her robes, a small device that pulsed with inner light. "Kale gave me this years ago. Emergency beacon, coded to his personal allies." She activated it, and immediately, Darren's neural implant registered a massive spike in encrypted communications. Within seconds, the situation changed. 3 aircrafts descended from the sky, bearing the colors of different noble houses. Armed guards poured out, engaging both the mercenaries and the corrupted palace guards. A figure in elaborate armor approached them, removing their helmet to reveal an elderly Thixian with skin like burnished copper. "Lady Valera," he said, bowing deeply. "Lord Malik extends his protection. Please, come with us." "Counselor Thane," Valera replied with visible relief. "Your timing is impeccable. Prince Kael prepared us for this possibility. He said if his death was announced, we should be ready for immediate action." Thane's multifaceted eyes turned to Darren. "You must be the human." "Darren Calder, thanks for the rescue. Don't thank me yet. We're far from safe." Thane gestured to the nearest aircraft. "The entire capital is about to become a battleground." As they boarded the aircraft, Darren looked back to see more forces arriving. The Commerce District had turned into a war zone, with different factions engaging in open combat. "This is what Kael wanted to prevent," Valera said softly beside him. "Or what he knew was inevitable," Darren replied. "Your husband didn't just plan for his death. He planned for a civil war." The aircraft rose above the city, and Darren got his first real look at the scope of the conflict. Multiple districts showed signs of fighting. The palace itself was surrounded by military vehicles, though it was unclear which side they were on. "Where are we going?" Darren asked Thane. "House Malik's fortress, outside the capital. Lord Malik himself is waiting, along with representatives from Houses Saren and Caldris. They wish to discuss the marriage and the evidence Prince Kael left behind." Speaking of which, Valera pulled out the datapad they'd retrieved from the sanctuary. "We need to analyze this properly." Kael said it contained proof of the conspiracy. Thane took the pad reverently. "I'll have our best cryptographers examine it immediately." The flight took 20 minutes, during which Darren watched the capital shrink behind them. The fortress that appeared ahead was less building and more mountain, carved and shaped into a defensive structure that could probably withstand orbital bombardment. Lord Malik himself met them at the landing pad. He was ancient even by Thixian standards. His skin so thin it was almost transparent, showing the complex network of bioluminescent channels beneath. "Lady Valera," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Darren's bones. "I grieve for your loss. Kael was the best of us." "Thank you, Lord Malik." "And you," Malik turned to Darren, "must be the human who has set our world ablaze simply by existing." "I'd like to point out that people were trying to kill me before I did anything," Darren said. "Indeed. Which tells us much about our enemy's intentions." Malik gestured for them to follow him inside. "Come, we have much to discuss and little time to do it." The fortress's interior was a blend of ancient architecture and cutting-edge technology. They were led to a war room where holographic displays showed real-time feeds from across the planet. 2 other Thixians were waiting, both bearing the elaborate dress of noble houses. "Lady Saren, Lord Caldris." Malik made introductions. "I believe you know Lady Valera. This is Darren Calder, the human prince Kael chose as his heir." Lady Saren, whose skin shifted through shades of deep purple, studied Darren with undisguised curiosity. "Remarkable. I can see why Kael was fascinated by your species. You're so compact." "We prefer efficiently designed," Darren replied, earning what he thought might be a laugh from Lord Caldris, a younger Thixian with silvery green skin. "The question," Lord Caldris said, "is whether we can actually pull this off. The Unity Clause hasn't been invoked in over 1,000 years. The legal challenges alone will be irrelevant if we're all dead," Malik interrupted. "Show them the intelligence reports." The holographic displays shifted, showing military movements across the planet. Darren didn't need to be a Thixian political expert to recognize a coup in progress. "Zorath has moved faster than anticipated," Lady Saren observed. He controls 40% of the military, possibly more, and he's claiming that Lady Valera murdered Prince Kael to seize power, Lord Caldress added. The marriage to a human is being portrayed as desperation, an illegal attempt to maintain control through alien influence. That's ridiculous, Valera protested. Of course it is, Malik agreed. But truth matters little in the court of public opinion, which is why we need to act quickly. The marriage must happen tonight. Tonight, Darren looked at the assembled nobles. The will gave us 3 days, which Zorath is using to consolidate power. Every hour we delay, he grows stronger. Malik manipulated the display, showing a timeline of events. If we invoke the Unity Clause tonight, during active hostilities, with proper witnesses, it becomes legally binding immediately. Zorath would have to openly rebel against established law to challenge it. And the consummation requirement, Valera asked carefully, can be addressed through biological sampling and genetic combination in a medical facility. The law is old. It doesn't specify the method, only the result. Darren felt a headache coming on. And what exactly does genetic combination mean? A hybrid sample, proving biological compatibility. It's largely ceremonial, but legally necessary. Of course it is. Darren looked at Valera. What do you think, ready to get married in the middle of a civil war? Do we have a choice? She replied. There's always a choice. We could run, take a ship, leave Thixian space, let them sort out their own problems. And let Kael's sacrifice mean nothing. Valera's skin flashed with anger. Let Zorath turn the Empire into a xenophobic military state that will eventually go to war with humanity. When you put it like that, Darren sighed. Fine. Let's get married. But I want it on record that this is the weirdest thing I've ever done. And I once smuggled singing crystals past a Buddhist monastery in space. Noted, Lord Malik said dryly. We'll need to prepare quickly. Lady Saren, can you handle the legal documentation? Already in progress? Lord Caldress, security. My personal guard is at your disposal. And I'll oversee the ceremony itself. Malik turned to Darren and Valera. You two need to prepare. There are traditional elements that must be observed, even in these circumstances. They were separated, each taken to different wings of the fortress. Darren found himself in a room with Counselor Thane and several other Thixians, who looked at him like he was a particularly interesting science experiment. The traditional marriage robes, Thane said, holding up something that looked like it was made of condensed starlight. They've been adjusted for human physiology. Adjusted how? They won't kill you. Comforting. As Darren struggled into the alien garments, which seemed to shift and move of their own accord, Thane briefed him on what to expect. The ceremony is simple in principle. You and Lady Valera will speak the binding words, exchange genetic samples through a ceremonial device, and be recognized by the witnesses. The whole process should take less than an hour. And then you'll be Prince Regent of the Third Dynasty, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails, which includes command of House Soros's military forces, control of their economic holdings, a seat on the Imperial Council, and the legal authority to challenge Zorath's claim to power. Darren paused in his struggle with the robes. I'm going to have military forces. Approximately 12,000 soldiers, 300 ships, and control of 6 systems. Jesus, Kael didn't mention that part. Prince Kael believed in learning by doing. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young Thixian guard entered, his skin flashing urgent patterns. Counselor, we have a problem. Zorath's forces have surrounded the fortress. They're demanding Lady Valera and the human be turned over for trial. Thane's expression hardened. How many? 3 battalions, with heavy armor and air support. They moved faster than expected, Thane said. He turned to Darren. Can you fight in those robes? Do I have a choice? Not really. Then yes. They moved quickly through the fortress, alarms beginning to sound. Darren could hear explosions in the distance, growing closer. The war room had become a hive of activity, with Lord Malik coordinating defenses, while Lady Saren worked frantically on legal documents. Valera was already there, dressed in robes that made her look like she was wearing liquid moonlight. Even in the chaos, Darren had to admit she was breathtaking. "Romantic setting for a wedding," he said, joining her at the tactical display. "I've always dreamed of getting married during a siege," she replied dryly. "They're jamming our communications," Lord Caldress reported. "We can't call for reinforcements." "Then we hold with what we have," Malik said firmly. "How long until the ceremony is ready?" 15 minutes, Lady Saren replied. "But we need a secure location." Another explosion, closer this time. The fortress shields flickered but held. "They're using siege weapons," someone reported. "The shields won't last more than an hour." "Then we do this now," Malik decided. "The chapel is the most defensible position. We perform the ceremony there." They moved as a group, guards forming a protective cordon around them. The chapel was a circular room at the heart of the fortress, its walls covered in ancient Thyaxian script that seemed to glow with inner light. "Places! Everyone!" Malik commanded. "Lady Saren, Lord Caldress, you stand as noble witnesses. Councillor Thane, you'll represent the legal authority. Guards, seal the doors." Darren and Valera stood in the center of the room, facing each other. Outside, the sound of battle grew louder. "This isn't how I imagined my wedding day," Darren admitted. "You imagined getting married?" Valera asked, surprised. "Once, long time ago, before the war, there was someone. It didn't work out." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. If it had, I wouldn't be here, about to marry alien royalty while under siege. And really, how many humans can say that?" "Despite everything," Valera smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face. "Begin the ceremony," Malik commanded, as another explosion shook the fortress. The words were in ancient Thyaxian, but Darren's implant translated them in real time. Vows of binding, of unity, of shared purpose. He repeated them phonetically, hoping he wasn't accidentally declaring war on someone. Valera spoke her parts with grace and dignity, even as dust fell from the ceiling from another impact. "The genetic combination," Lady Saren said, producing a crystalline device. Darren and Valera each placed their hands on it. He felt a slight tingle, then a strange sensation like something fundamental was being rewritten. "By the authority vested in me by the Imperial Council and the ancient laws of Thyaxis," Lord Malik said formally, "I declare this union valid and binding. The Unity Clause is invoked. Let any who challenge this face the full weight of imperial law." The moment the words were spoken, something changed. Darren felt it in his implant, a shift in the local network. Suddenly, he had access to systems and authorities he hadn't even known existed. "It's done," Lady Saren said, uploading the documentation to what remained of the planetary network. "You're legally married." "Congratulations," Lord Caldress said. "You're now one of the most wanted beings in the galaxy." The chapel doors exploded inward. Zorath himself stood there, backed by dozens of soldiers. His chrome skin was blazing with fury, patterns of rage cycling across his surface. "This farce ends now," he declared. "You've violated every sacred tradition of our people. Valera, marrying this creature to maintain power, your husband would be disgusted." "My husband arranged this marriage," Valera said coldly. "As you well know, since you had him killed." "Prove it," Zorath challenged. "Actually," Darren said, stepping forward, "we can—" He pulled out the datapad they'd retrieved from the sanctuary, but instead of handing it over, he activated his neural implant's broadcast function, something he'd figured out during the ceremony when the new authorizations kicked in. "Every Thyaxian in this star system is about to receive some interesting reading material," he said. "Financial records showing payments from your accounts to Corvani mercenaries, Communication logs discussing the assassination. And my personal favorite, a recording of you admitting to the murder, taken from your own security systems.
Zorath's skin went pale. That's impossible. Those systems were encrypted.
By Thixian standards, sure. But Kale knew something you didn't. Human encryption methods are completely different from yours. Primitive, you might say. So primitive that your advanced systems don't even recognize them as encryption. Kale had me design a backup system years ago, as a favor. It's been recording everything since before his death. It was a bluff, mostly. The datapad did contain evidence, but not as much as Darren was implying. But Zorath didn't know that, and the uncertainty was enough.
Even if that were true,
Zorath said, though his voice had lost some of its confidence. You're still surrounded. You'll never leave this fortress alive. Maybe not, Darren agreed. But the Unity Clause is already in effect. I'm legally Prince Regent now, which means those soldiers behind you, they're technically committing treason by pointing weapons at me. He raised his voice, addressing the soldiers directly. How many of you want to be executed for treason when this is over? Because that's what happens to soldiers who attack rightful nobility during a legal succession. Even if you win, even if you kill us, the law is clear. Every one of you will be hunted down. He could see doubt in some of the soldiers' faces. Their weapons wavered slightly. Don't listen to this alien, Zorath commanded. Alien, yes, Darren agreed. But also your legal Prince Regent, married to the last heir of House Saurus, with the full authority of the Unity Clause behind me. And more importantly, I'm the person offering you a way out of this that doesn't end with your execution. What are you proposing? One of the soldiers asked. Stand down now, and you'll be granted amnesty. You were following orders you believed were legal. That's not treason. That's a misunderstanding. But if you fire a single shot after being informed of my legal status, well, that's a different story. More weapons lowered. Zorath's skin cycled through furious patterns. You think you've won, he snarled at Darren. You know nothing of our politics, our culture. The nobles will never accept a human ruler. They don't have to accept me, Darren replied. They just have to accept the law. And from what I've learned about Thixians, you're very big on following rules. Before Zorath could respond, new sounds filled the air. Ships, lots of them, approaching fast. But these weren't more of Zorath's forces. House Saurus military vessels incoming, someone reported. They're responding to the Prince Regent's authorization codes. Darren smiled. Did I mention that I figured out how to use my new military command codes? Amazing what you can do with a neural implant and the right authorizations. Zorath looked around, realizing he was outmaneuvered. His own soldiers were backing away, unwilling to fire on someone who might actually be their legal superior. This isn't over, he said finally. The council will never ratify this abomination of a marriage. We'll see, Darren replied. But for now, Lord Zorath, I think you should leave, before my wife decides to press charges for the attempted murder of her husband. The first one. I mean, although trying to kill the second one probably doesn't help your case. Zorath turned and stormed out, his remaining loyal soldiers following. The moment he was gone, Darren's legs nearly gave out. Valeera caught his arm, steadying him.
That was insane, she said. You bluffed him with partial data and pure bravado.
Humans are good at bluffing. We've been pretending to belong in the galaxy since we discovered FTL travel. Lord Malik approached them, his ancient features showing what might have been approval. That was well done, Prince Regent. You may survive Thixian politics after all. Great. How long do I have to keep this up? The rest of your life. I'm afraid. Marriage to a Thixian is permanent. There's no divorce in our culture. Darren looked at Valeera, who was still holding his arm. No pressure, then.
None at all, she agreed.
Though we should probably discuss living arrangements. and the fact that we know almost nothing about each other. Details, Darren said. First, we need to deal with the civil war we just started. Technically, Zorath started it. Do you think that distinction will matter to the thousands of soldiers about to start shooting at each other? Probably not. Lady Saren approached with a communication device. Prince Regent, the commander of the Saurus fleet is requesting orders. Darren took the device, still not quite believing this was real. 3 days ago, he'd been nobody. Now he was commanding alien fleets. Tell them to secure the capital, he said, trying to sound like he knew what he was doing. No unnecessary violence. Anyone who surrenders is to be granted amnesty. We're trying to prevent a civil war, not start one. Yes, Your Highness. Your Highness. Darren wondered if he'd ever get used to that. What now? He asked Valeera. Now we return to the capital. We need to present ourselves to the council, solidify our position, and figure out who else was involved in Kale's assassination. And after that, we figure out how a human and a Thexian actually make a marriage work. One crisis at a time, Darren agreed. He looked around the damaged chapel, at the noble witnesses who'd risked everything to support them, at his new wife who he barely knew, but was now bound to forever. You know, Kale always said he'd find a way to make me respectable. I don't think this is what either of us had in mind. Kyle was many things, but predictable wasn't one of them, Valeera said softly. He chose you for a reason, Darren. I'm beginning to see why. Because I'm crazy enough to marry an alien princess during a coup. Because you're brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when the odds are impossible. She paused, then added, and because you're probably the only being in the galaxy who could make Zorath back down with nothing but words and attitude. It's a gift, Darren said modestly. Outside, the sounds of battle were fading as Zorath's forces retreated and House Saurus ships took control of the airspace. The immediate crisis was over, but Darren knew this was just the beginning. He had a wife he didn't know, a civil war to prevent, and apparently, the future of human-Thixian relations resting on his shoulders. Hey, he said to Valeera as they prepared to leave the chapel. What do you think Kale would say if he could see us now? Valeera considered for a moment. He'd probably laugh at the chaos he's caused, then remind us that the real work is just beginning. Sounds about right. Darren offered her his arm, a gesture that seemed to surprise her. Shall we go save the galaxy, wife? Just the Empire will do for now, husband. As they walked out together, Darren couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, somehow, Kale was watching all of this and smiling that insufferable smile of his. The bastard had orchestrated all of this, turned his death into the catalyst for change he'd always wanted to see. And now it was up to Darren and Valeera to make sure that change actually happened. The return to the capital was surreal. Just hours ago, Darren had been fleeing through sewage tunnels with assassins on his heels. Now he sat in the command chair of a Thixian battlecruiser, with officers calling him Your Highness and awaiting his orders. The palace is secure, Commander Arcos reported. The Thixian military officer had been Kale's personal guard captain, and his loyalty had transferred seamlessly to the new Prince Regent. Zorath's forces have withdrawn to the industrial sector. They're fortifying positions but haven't made any aggressive moves. He's waiting to see what the council does, Valeera said from beside Darren. She'd changed from the ceremonial robes into practical combat attire that somehow still managed to look regal. If they reject our marriage, he can claim legitimacy. When does the council convene? Darren asked. 3 hours, Arcos replied. All 48 members have been summoned for emergency session. 48 aliens who need to be convinced that a human deserves to rule part of their empire. Darren muttered, No pressure. You won't be alone, Valeera reminded him. Houses Malik, Saren, and Kaldris have already declared support. That's 12 votes. Which means we need 13 more for a majority. The neutrals will be key, Arcos observed. Houses that have no stake in either side winning. If you can convince them that stability under your rule is better than civil war under Zorath, they might support you. The battlecruiser descended toward the palace, and Darren got his first good look at the damage from the morning's fighting. Entire sections of the Commerce District were still smoking, and military vehicles patrolled the streets. The beautiful Crystal City looked like it had been punched in the face. "How many casualties?" he asked quietly. 600 confirmed dead. Over 2,000 injured, Arcos reported. Mostly civilians caught in the crossfire. Darren felt the weight of those numbers settle on his shoulders. People had died because of a power struggle he'd been drafted into. "Make sure the injured get medical attention. I don't care which side they supported."
"Yes, Your Highness."
The palace landing pad was surrounded by House Saurus guards, their armor bearing the complex geometric patterns that served as heraldry. They saluted as Darren and Valera disembarked, a gesture that still felt wrong to him. Yesterday, he'd been a smuggler. Today, soldiers were saluting him. The throne room had been cleaned up. Those scorch marks on the walls showed where the fighting had been heaviest. The crystal throne itself sat empty, a reminder that the real power in the Empire was still contested. "We need to prepare for the council meeting," Valera said, leading him to what had been Kael's private study. "There are protocols to observe, specific arguments that will resonate with different houses." The study was a mixture of ancient books and advanced technology, very much like Kael himself had been. Darren ran his fingers along the spine of a text, written in a language he couldn't read, remembering his friend's love of collecting knowledge from across the galaxy. "He spent a lot of time here," Valera said softly, watching him. "Especially in the last few months. I think he knew what was coming." "Then why didn't he stop it? Why let himself be killed?" "Because his death accomplished more than his life could have. It exposed Zorath, united the progressive houses, and forced the Empire to confront its prejudices." She paused. "And it brought you here." "Lucky me." Darren slumped into a chair that automatically adjusted to his human proportions. "I'm not a politician, Valera. I don't know how to convince a bunch of alien nobles that I deserve to be here." "Then don't try to be a politician. Be yourself. Be the human who stood up to Zorath with nothing but words. Be the soldier who fought beside Kael. Be the man who was willing to marry a stranger to honor a friend's dying wish."
"When you put it like that, I sound almost heroic."
"You are, in your own chaotic human way." She pulled up a holographic display showing the council members. "Let me explain who we're dealing with." For the next 2 hours, Valera gave him a crash course in Theixian politics. Which houses harbored old grudges? Which ones prioritized profit over ideology? Which ones might be swayed by appeals to tradition versus progress? It was overwhelming, but Darren found himself absorbing more than he expected. Maybe it was the neural implant, or maybe it was just desperation sharpening his focus.
"Lord Nexus of House Prion is key," Valera explained, highlighting one profile. "He controls 8 votes through allied minor houses. He's pragmatic, cares more about economic stability than racial purity. If we can convince him that our rule would be good for trade." "I ran smuggling operations through 3 of his systems," Darren said suddenly. "Never got caught, but I know his security protocols, his trade routes. I could offer to share that information, help him plug the gaps." Valera stared at him. "You smuggled through Prion systems. I smuggled through everybody's systems. It's kind of what I did. That's actually useful. What else do you know about council members from your criminal activities?" "Criminal is such a harsh word. I prefer entrepreneurially flexible."
"Despite everything," Valera laughed. It was a sound like crystal chimes in a soft breeze. Kael would have loved that phrase. A knock at the door interrupted them. Commander Arcos entered, his expression grim. "Your Highnesses, We have a situation. Lord Zorath is broadcasting on all channels. They followed him to the communication center, where Zorath's image filled multiple screens. He stood in what looked like a military command center, surrounded by officers and weapons. "Citizens of the Thixian Empire," he was saying, "I come before you with grave news. Our beloved Prince Kael is dead, murdered by those who would corrupt our great civilization. His widow, in her grief and desperation, has violated our most sacred laws by taking a human as her husband."
"He's getting ahead of us," Valeera muttered.
"This is not merely a marriage of convenience," Zorath continued. "This is an invasion by stealth. The humans have long coveted our technology, our resources. Now, they seek to claim them through this sham union. I call upon all loyal Thixians to reject this abomination. The Council must annul this marriage and restore proper order to our empire." The broadcast shifted to show images from the morning's fighting, carefully edited to make it look like Darren and Valeera's forces had been the aggressors. "Furthermore," Zorath said, "I present evidence that the human Darren Calder is a criminal, wanted in 12 systems for smuggling, theft, and various other crimes." Darren's mugshots from various arrests appeared on screen. He had to admit, he looked pretty disreputable in most of them. "This is who Lady Valeera would have rule over you. A criminal, a primitive, a parasite who—" Darren grabbed the broadcast controls from the surprise technician. "Mind if I respond?" Before anyone could stop him, he'd patched himself into the same communication network, his image replacing Zorath's on screens across the planet. "Hi everyone, Darren Calder here, your new Prince Regent and, apparently, notorious criminal mastermind." He grinned at the camera. "Lord Zorath's right about my record. I've been arrested 12 times. Want to know why? Because I was smuggling medical supplies to quarantine colonies, food to blockaded systems, freedom to slaves in the outer reaches." He pulled up his own files, displaying them for everyone to see. "Every crime I committed was against unjust laws that prioritized profit over people. And yes, I made money doing it. I'm not a saint, but I never murdered anyone for political gain, unlike some lords I could mention." The data from Kael's investigation appeared on screen, showing the financial transfers to the mercenaries, the communication logs, everything they'd gathered. "Lord Zorath talks about protecting Thixian purity, but he hired Corvani mercenaries to kill Prince Kael. He claims to defend our traditions, but he murdered a prince of the realm. He says I'm a parasite, but I'm not the one who tried to seize power through assassination." Darren leaned closer to the camera. "You want to know why Kael chose me? Because I'm nobody. I have no political ambitions, no dynasty to promote, no agenda except staying alive, and maybe making the galaxy a little less terrible. I didn't ask for this job, but I'm here now, and I'm going to do it right." He paused, then added, "Also, Lord Zorath, your security systems are terrible. I've been reading your private communications for the last hour. Might want to change your passwords. Thixian supremacy, when I'm 23, is not as clever as you think." He cut the feed before Zorath could respond, turning to find everyone in the communication center staring at him. "What he said, he started it. You just publicly humiliated one of the most powerful nobles in the Empire," Arcos said slowly. "Yeah, probably not my smartest move, but it felt good." "It was brilliant," Valeera said, surprising him. "You just reframed the entire narrative. Instead of tradition versus corruption, it's now honesty versus deception. The public loves an underdog story." "Great. So I'm the galaxy's most unlikely underdog prince. That should look good on my business cards." The communication system lit up with incoming messages. Support from minor houses, condemnation from Zorath's allies, and a lot of confusion from everyone else. "The council meeting is in 30 minutes, Arcos reminded them. "We should go." The council chamber was a massive spherical room at the heart of the palace, designed so that every member could see every other member. 48 platforms floated at different levels, each one holding a representative of a major house. At the center, 2 platforms had been raised for Darren and Valera to present their case. As they entered, Darren felt the weight of 48 alien gazes upon him. Some were curious, some hostile, some unreadable. The platforms arranged themselves in a complex pattern that Valera had explained represented political alignments going back millennia. Lord Malik called the session to order, his ancient voice resonating through the chamber. "We are gathered to determine the legitimacy of the marriage between Lady Valera Saris and the human Darren Calder, conducted under the Unity Clause during active hostilities. I object to this entire proceeding," Zorath declared from his platform. "A human cannot hold Theoxian titles. This is fundamental to our law." "The law says no such thing," Lady Saren countered. "It has simply never been tested before." "Because it's absurd," Zorath's supporters murmured agreement. "Humans are barely civilized. They've had faster-than-light travel for less than a century. They still wage war among themselves. They're violent, primitive, and completely incompatible with our way of life." "May I speak?" Darren asked. The chamber fell silent. A human addressing the Theoxian High Council was unprecedented. "The floor recognizes Prince Regent Darren Calder," Lord Malik said formally. Darren stood on his platform, which rose to put him at eye level with the floating council members. "Lord Zorath's right. Humans are violent. We're primitive by your standards. We fight among ourselves constantly. But you know what else we are adaptable." He gestured around the chamber. "I've been on this planet for less than 2 days, and I've already learned your marriage customs, your legal system, and apparently how to hack your security networks. Give us a decade, and humans will be building technology to rival yours. Give us a century, and we'll be teaching you things you never imagined." "Arrogance," someone shouted. "No, history," Darren replied. "Every species that's underestimated humanity has regretted it. We went from discovering fire to splitting the atom in less time than some of you have been alive. We're not the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced, but we're the most stubborn creatures in the galaxy." He looked directly at Lord Nexus. The pragmatist Valera had identified as key. "You're worried about trade disruptions. I get it. War is bad for business. But consider this: human trade networks reach parts of the galaxy you can't access. We're too insignificant for most species to bother blocking. Partner with us, and I can open markets you've never dreamed of." "And what of our traditions?" an elderly council member asked. "What of the purity of Theoxian bloodlines?" "With respect, Counselor, your bloodlines are already pure. Too pure. I've seen your medical data. Genetic diversity in the Theoxian population has decreased by 30% in the last millennium. You're slowly strangling yourselves with tradition." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Discussing Theoxian genetic issues was taboo. "How dare you?" Zorath began. "I dare because it's true, and everyone here knows it," Darren interrupted. Kale knew it too. That's why he studied other species, why he believed in cooperation over isolation. Not because he was a traitor to your kind, but because he loved your kind enough to want to save it. Valera rose beside him. "My husband speaks truth, however bluntly." Kale saw the future clearly. Either we evolve, adapt, and embrace change, or we stagnate and eventually fall. The marriage between Darren and myself is symbolic. Yes, but symbols matter. We represent the possibility of cooperation, of growth, of a future where strength comes from diversity rather than purity. "Pretty words," Zorath said coldly. "But the fact remains that this marriage is biologically impossible. The consummation requirement has been met," Lady Saren interrupted, producing a medical report. "Genetic combination was achieved through synthetic fusion, using advanced medical techniques. The letter of the law has been satisfied." "A technicality." "The law is built on technicalities," Lord Caldrus observed. "If we start ignoring them when convenient, the entire system collapses. The debate raged for 2 more hours. Arguments about tradition, law, biology, politics, and economics flew back and forth. Darren contributed when he could, but mostly he watched and learned. These beings had been playing political games for centuries. He was definitely out of his depth. Finally, Lord Malik called for the vote. All in favor of recognizing the marriage and confirming Darren Calder as Prince Regent of the Third Dynasty. Platforms lit up with affirmative signals. Darren counted mentally. 12 from their confirmed allies, then 13, 15, 20. Lord Nexus's platform remained dark, along with his 7 allied houses. The pragmatist was waiting, calculating. Lord Nexus, Malik prompted. The human made an interesting offer, Nexus said slowly. Access to new trade routes, information about security weaknesses. These are valuable considerations. He paused dramatically. House Prion votes in favor. His 7 allies followed suit. 28 votes in favor, enough for a clear majority. The motion passes, Lord Malik announced. The marriage is recognized. Darren Calder is confirmed as Prince Regent of the Third Dynasty. Zorath shot to his feet. This is not over. The military will never accept. Alarms suddenly blared through the chamber. Every platform's communication system activated simultaneously, showing the same emergency broadcast. Attention, Theixian Empire, an unfamiliar voice announced. This is Admiral Crix of the Void Reaper Armada. Your petty squabbles have weakened your defenses. We thank you for the opportunity. The image shifted to show massive ships dropping out of hyperspace above Theixis Prime. Ships Darren recognized with a chill of fear. The Void Reapers, the genocidal force that he and Kale had fought 8 years ago, had returned. Your capital will burn, Admiral Crix continued. Your empire will fall, and your species will serve as fuel for our expansion. You have 6 hours to surrender unconditionally. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. This can't be happening, someone whispered. The Void Reapers were destroyed. Obviously not, Darren said, his mind already shifting to combat mode. How many ships? Sensors show 300 vessels, Arcos reported, his image appearing on the platform's display. They're taking position around the planet. Our fleet, scattered. Half are loyal to you, half to Lord Zorath. Neither force alone can match the Reapers. Darren looked at Zorath across the chamber. The chrome-skinned noble looked as shocked as everyone else. Well, Lord Zorath, Darren said loudly, looks like we have a choice. Keep fighting each other and let the Reapers destroy us all, or work together and maybe survive. What's it going to be? Zorath's skin cycled through various colors of rage and calculation. You expect me to follow a human? No, I expect you to help save your planet. Following me is just a bonus. Even if we combined forces, Lord Nexus interjected, we're outnumbered. The Reapers have superior firepower. Numbers aren't everything, Darren said. Kale and I beat them before with a smaller force. That was a single fleet. This is an armada. Then we'll need to be creative. Darren turned to Valeera. Remember what I said about humans being adaptable. Time to prove it. He accessed the command network through his neural implant, his new authority giving him overview of all military assets. Commander Arcos, I need you to recall every ship we have. Lord Zorath, I assume you want your forces to survive this? Of course. Then order them to coordinate with ours. We need a unified defense. And then what Zorath demanded. Even unified, we can't match their firepower. No. But we can outsmart them. Darren pulled up tactical displays, showing the Reaper formation. The Void Reapers are predictable. They rely on overwhelming force and terror tactics. They expect us to either surrender or fight conventionally. We're going to do neither. What are you proposing? Lord Malik asked. Something insane, probably suicidal, and absolutely human. Darren grinned. We're going to invite them to dinner. What? The Reapers want us to surrender in 6 hours, so we'll send a diplomatic envoy to negotiate terms. While they're talking, we'll be preparing something special." "They'll never fall for that," Zorath protested. "They will if the envoy is me," Darren said. "A human Prince Regent. They'll be too curious to resist. They'll want to gloat, to show their superiority." "It's suicide," Valera said. "They'll kill you the moment you board their ship." "Maybe. Or maybe they'll be overconfident enough to let me live long enough to execute the real plan." "Which is?" Darren's grin widened. "Remember that hybrid weapon Kale left me? It's not just a rifle. I had time to examine it properly. It's a miniaturized quantum virus projector. One shot into their main computer core, and their entire fleet gets a very nasty surprise." "That's impossible," someone said. "No virus could affect Reaper technology." "A Thixian virus couldn't. A human one couldn't. But a hybrid. Something that combines both approaches." Darren shrugged. Kale was a genius. He didn't just plan for his death. He planned for what would come after. "You're betting everything on a weapon you barely understand?" Zorath asked incredulously. "No. I'm betting everything on Kale being smarter than all of us combined." Darren looked around the chamber. He knew the Reapers would return. He knew they'd attack when we were weakened by internal conflict. So he set up the dominoes. His death, the marriage, the civil war, all of it was to draw them out. "That's insane," Lord Nexus said. "That's Kale," Valera said softly. "He always did play the long game." "So what do you need from us?" Lord Malik asked. "A unified front. The Reapers need to believe we're beaten. Desperate. Zorath's forces and mine need to look like we're barely holding together a coalition." Darren looked at Zorath. "Can you pretend to work with me for 6 hours?" Zorath's skin rippled with distaste. "To save the Empire, I suppose I must." "Great. Then let's save the world. Again. In my case." Darren turned to Valera. "I'm going to need a really impressive envoy ship. Something that screams desperate but trying to look dignified." "You're really going to do this," she said. It wasn't a question. "Unless someone has a better idea." No one did. As the council dispersed to prepare for the desperate gambit, Valera pulled Darren aside. "This is insane. You barely know me. You've been married to me for less than a day, and you're about to risk your life for my people." "Our people," Darren corrected. "I'm Prince Regent now. Remember besides. This is what Kale would do. Probably with more style and less swearing. But still. Kale is dead. Maybe. Or maybe he's just really committed to his cover story." At Valera's shocked expression, Darren shrugged. "Come on. The body was cremated before anyone could examine it properly. The timing is too perfect. The plan's too detailed. Either Kale was psychic, or he's out there somewhere, watching all this play out." "That's impossible." 24 hours ago, me marrying you was impossible. I've recalibrated my definition of the word." Valera studied him for a long moment. "If you die up there, I'll have been widowed twice in 1 week. Then I better not die." He paused. "Can I ask you something? If we survive this, if we actually pull this off, what then? Do we stay married? Do we pretend this was all just political necessity?" "I don't know," she admitted. "You're not what I expected. You're crude, chaotic, and completely inappropriate for Thixian society. But you're also brave, clever, and loyal beyond reason." She touched his face gently, her skin warm against his. Kale chose well. "That's not really an answer." "Then, how about this: survive the next 6 hours, and we'll figure out the rest together." "Deal." Darren stepped back, checking the hybrid weapon one more time. "Time to go be diplomatic. How hard could it be?" The envoy ship was a masterpiece of desperate elegance. The Ixian diplomatic vessels were already impressive. But this one had been hastily modified to project an image of power, barely maintaining dignity in defeat. The hull gleamed with fresh polish, that couldn't quite hide the battle scars underneath. And the energy signatures flickered just enough to suggest damaged systems. "Remember," Commander Arcos said as Darren prepared to board, "the virus needs direct contact with their central processing core. You'll have maybe 30 seconds after activation before their systems detect it. 30 seconds to save the galaxy. No pressure." Darren checked the hybrid weapon one final time. It looked like an ornate ceremonial piece now, disguised as part of his formal diplomatic attire. "How's our fleet looking?" 60% assembled, Valera reported from the command center. "Zorath's forces are maintaining position on the opposite side of the planet. If the Reapers scan us, they'll see exactly what we want them to see, a fractured defense barely held together." "Good. Make sure to throw in some angry communications between our forces and Zorath's. Make it believable." "Already done. Zorath actually helped script them. He's disturbingly good at pretending to hate you." "Pretending?" Valera's lips twitched slightly. His exact words were, "I don't need to pretend, but I suppose I can exaggerate for effect." "At least he's honest." Darren turned to face her. "If this goes wrong—" "It won't. But if it does, then I'll personally fly up there and drag you back." She adjusted his diplomatic sash, her fingers lingering on the fabric. "Kale believed in you. I'm starting to see why. Because I'm crazy enough to fly into an enemy armada with nothing but a prototype weapon and human stubbornness. Because you're brave enough to try." She stepped back. "The Reapers are responding to our communication. They'll receive you in 2 hours." "Perfect. Just enough time for me to remember why this is a terrible idea." The journey to the Reaper flagship felt like flying into the mouth of a mechanical god. The vessel was massive, easily 10 times the size of any Thexian battleship. Its hull, a writhing mass of organic-looking metal that seemed to shift and breathe. Smaller Reaper ships formed an honor guard around Darren's envoy vessel, their weapons trained on him at all times. "Human Prince Regent." A voice like grinding metal filled his cockpit. "You will dock at Port 7. Any deviation will result in immediate termination." "Friendly bunch," Darren muttered, guiding his ship toward the indicated docking port. The interior of the Reaper ship was worse than the exterior. The walls pulsed with a sick green light, and the air smelled of ozone and something organic that had been dead too long. Darren was met by things that might have once been living creatures, but were now more machine than flesh, their bodies integrated into the ship's systems. "Follow," one of them commanded in a voice that came from speakers grafted into its throat. They led him through corridors that seemed to shift and reconfigure as they walked, the architecture following some alien logic that made his eyes water. Finally, they arrived at what passed for a throne room, where Admiral Crix waited. The Admiral had probably been humanoid once. Now he was a nightmare fusion of flesh and technology. Standing 12 feet tall with multiple arms that ended in various weapons and tools. His face, or what remained of it, was a skull wrapped in synthetic muscle with eyes that burned with artificial light. "The human who thinks himself worthy of Thexian nobility," Crix said, his voice reverberating through the chamber. "How amusing." "Admiral Crix," Darren said, forcing himself to remain calm. "I've come to discuss terms." "Terms," Crix laughed, a sound like metal tearing. "There are no terms. Your species will be harvested, your technology integrated, your planet stripped. This is not negotiation. This is notification." "That's disappointing. I was hoping we could avoid unnecessary bloodshed." "Blood is never unnecessary. It is fuel for evolution." Crix moved closer, his massive form making the floor shake. "You fought us before. Didn't you 8 years ago? You and the Thixian Prince." "We did." "You destroyed 12 of our ships. Impressive for such primitive creatures." Crix's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Where is Prince Kale now?" "Dead." "Pity. We would have enjoyed adding his biological distinctiveness to our own." One of Crix's mechanical arms extended toward Darren. You will make an adequate substitute. I'm flattered, but I'm already taken. Married, actually. Just yesterday. Humor. A wasteful trait. It will be eliminated when you are processed. Darren needed to get closer to the ship's core. He could see the neural pathways running through the walls, all leading deeper into the vessel. Before you process me, mind giving me the tour? I've never seen technology like this. Curiosity. Another trait to be eliminated. But Crix seemed amused. Very well. Witness the superiority of the Void Reapers before you become part of it. The Admiral led him deeper into the ship, past chambers where captured beings were being converted into cyber-biological components. Darren forced himself not to react to the horror, keeping his expression professionally interested. Your ships are part biological, part mechanical, he observed. How do you maintain the balance? The flesh serves the machine. The machine perfects the flesh. Together, they become something greater. Crix gestured to a massive chamber ahead. Behold, our processing core. The room was the size of a stadium, filled with a pulsing mass of neural tissue interconnected with quantum processors. It was beautiful and terrifying, like looking at the brain of a god that had gone insane. Every ship in our fleet is connected through this network, Crix explained. Every thought, every command flows through this nexus. It is perfection. It's certainly impressive, Darren agreed, his hand moving casually to the ceremonial weapon at his side. But doesn't that create a vulnerability if something happened to this core? Nothing can happen to it. It is protected by redundancies upon redundancies. No weapon could damage it. No virus could infect it. We have evolved beyond such weaknesses. Of course you have. Darren activated the weapon with a thought, feeling it warm against his palm. But you haven't evolved beyond arrogance. He moved faster than Crix expected, the hybrid weapon firing a single, almost invisible pulse directly into the neural mass. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screaming started. The neural tissue began to convulse, synthetic neurons firing randomly as the quantum virus spread through the network. Every screen in the chamber exploded in cascading error messages. What have you done? Crix roared, his weapons powering up. Something incredibly stupid, Darren admitted, diving behind a console as energy beams seared the air where he'd been standing. But also kind of brilliant. The virus Kale had created was a work of art. It didn't just attack the Reaper systems, it made them attack themselves. The biological components rejected the mechanical ones, while the quantum processors began calculating paradoxes that consumed all available processing power. Crix charged at Darren, moving with surprising speed for something so large. Darren rolled aside, but one of the Admiral's arms caught him, lifting him into the air. You think you've won, Crix snarled, his grip tightening. This is one ship. The fleet will survive. About that, Darren gasped, struggling to breathe. The virus is quantum entangled. Every ship connected to this network is getting the same treatment right now. As if to prove his point, explosions began echoing through the vessel. The walls started to buckle as biological and mechanical systems turned on each other. Impossible. Improbable, Darren corrected. But humans specialize in the improbable. Crix's grip loosened as his own systems began to malfunction. Darren dropped to the floor, gasping. Around them, the ship was tearing itself apart. You've doomed yourself too, Crix said, his voice distorting. You'll never escape. Probably not, Darren agreed, backing toward the exit. But that's kind of my thing. Impossible escapes from certain death. He ran. The corridors were chaos. Reaper drones wandered aimlessly, their control systems offline. Biological components were growing wild, breaking free from their mechanical constraints. The ship's gravity fluctuated, sending Darren bouncing off walls and ceiling. His neural implant buzzed. Somehow, a communication was getting through. Darren, Valera's voice, distorted but unmistakable. The Reaper fleet is in chaos. What did you do? Started a divorce between their biological and mechanical halves. Very messy. Lots of property damage. Get to your ship. Working on it. He found the docking port more by luck than navigation. His envoy ship was still there, miraculously untouched. He dove into the cockpit, firing up the engines just as the docking bay began to decompress. The ship launched into space, and Darren got his first look at what his virus had accomplished. The entire Reaper fleet was in various stages of self-destruction. Some ships were literally tearing themselves in half as biological growths burst from their hulls. Others spun wildly, their navigation systems firing randomly. All ships. This is Prince Regent Calder, Darren broadcast. The Reaper fleet is vulnerable. Attack now. Target their command ships while they're disabled. The combined Thixian fleet, both his forces and Zorath's, emerged from behind the planet's curve. Energy beams and missiles filled space as they engaged the crippled Reaper vessels. Darren's ship shook as something massive exploded behind him. He looked back to see the Reaper flagship splitting apart, Admiral Crix's throne room venting into space. "That's for everyone you harvested," he muttered. But the battle wasn't over. Some Reaper ships were recovering, their redundant systems coming online. They began returning fire, and several Thixian vessels exploded. "We need to press the attack," Zorath's voice came over the comm, "before they adapt to the virus." "Agreed," Darren replied. "All ships, Formation Delta, just like we discussed." "We didn't discuss any Formation Delta," Zorath said. "I know. I'm making it up as I go. Just follow my lead." He dove his small envoy ship toward the largest remaining Reaper vessel, using its size and maneuverability to avoid the defensive fire. Behind him, the Thixian fleet followed, adapting to his chaotic pattern. "You're insane," Zorath commented. "Yeah, but it's working." It was working. The unpredictable attack pattern was keeping the damaged Reaper systems from achieving target lock. Thixian weapons pounded the enemy ships, exploiting every weakness the virus had created. The battle raged for 3 hours. By the end, space around Thixis Prime was littered with the wreckage of Reaper vessels. Of the 300 ships that had threatened the planet, none remained functional. Darren landed his battered envoy ship on the palace platform to find hundreds of Thixians waiting. As he emerged, they did something unprecedented. They applauded. Even some of Zorath's supporters were clapping. Valera pushed through the crowd and, without warning, pulled him into an embrace that sent sparkles through his nervous system. "You absolute madman," she said against his ear. "You actually did it." "Team effort," Darren replied, his arms around her. "The virus was Kale's. The fleet was yours and Zorath's. I just pushed the button." "Don't be modest. It doesn't suit you." Lord Zorath approached, his chrome skin cycling through colors Darren couldn't interpret. For a moment, they stood facing each other, the human who'd claimed a Thixian title and the Thixian who'd tried to kill him for it. "You fought well," Zorath said finally. "For a human." "Thanks. You didn't do too bad yourself, for someone who wanted me dead this morning." "I still believe humans have no place ruling Thixians," Zorath said. "But perhaps they have a place fighting alongside us." "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it." Zorath turned to go, then paused. "The evidence you have about Prince Kale's assassination. We should discuss it. Privately." "Why?" "Because I didn't kill him." Zorath's expression was unreadable. "I wanted him removed from power. Yes. But assassination. That's not my way. Someone used my opposition to him as cover for their own agenda." Darren exchanged glances with Valera. "Then who killed him?" "That's what we need to find out." Zorath walked away, his guards falling in behind him. Later, in Kale's study, Darren, Valera, and surprisingly, Zorath, reviewed all the evidence they'd gathered, the financial records, the communications, the mercenary contracts, These authorization codes, Zorath said, pointing to a detail Darren had missed. They're from my office, but this isn't my syntax. Someone with access to my systems did this.
Someone close to you, Valeera observed.
Very close.
Zorath's skin darkened with anger. I've been played for a fool.
Join the club, Darren said. We've all been manipulated. The question is, by whom? A soft chime from the study's communication system interrupted them. The screen activated, showing a figure shrouded in shadows. Congratulations on your victory, a distorted voice said. The Reapers were becoming problematic. You've done us a service.
Who are you? Darren demanded. Someone with interest in the stability of the galaxy.
Prince Kael understood this. His sacrifice was necessary.
You're saying you killed him.
I'm saying he chose to die for a greater purpose. The Reapers needed to be stopped. The Thixian Empire needed to evolve. Humanity needed to be integrated. All of this required a catalyst.
Kyle, Valeera whispered. He played his part perfectly. As have all of you.
The figure leaned forward slightly, still hidden in darkness. The galaxy is changing. Old powers are falling. New alliances are forming. What happened today is just the beginning.
Beginning of what? Darren asked.
You'll see. Prince Regent Calder, Lady Valeera, Lord Zorath. You've all proven yourselves capable. We may have use for you in the future. The transmission ended before anyone could respond.
What the hell was that? Darren asked.
I don't know, Zorath admitted. But whoever they are, they've been orchestrating events for years. The question is whether they're friend or foe. Maybe neither, Valeera said thoughtfully. Maybe there's something else entirely.
They sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications. Then Darren laughed, a slightly hysterical sound.
What's funny? Valeera asked. 3 days ago, I was a smuggler worried about making rent on my ship. Now I'm married to alien royalty. I've defeated an invasion, and apparently I'm a pawn in some galactic conspiracy. He shook his head. Kyle always said he'd make my life interesting. Speaking of Kael, Zorath said, standing to leave. That theory you mentioned, about him faking his death?
Yeah.
Keep pursuing it. Because the more I think about it, the more sense it makes. He paused at the door. We're not friends, human, but we're no longer enemies. That will have to suffice. After he left, Darren and Valeera were alone for the first time since the battle. So, Darren said, we saved the planet, stopped a civil war, uncovered a conspiracy. Not bad for a day's work. The day's not over, Valeera pointed out. We still have to deal with the aftermath. The Council will want answers. The public will demand explanations. And we need to figure out what our marriage actually means, now that the immediate crisis is over. Right. That. Darren rubbed the back of his neck. Look, I know this was all political necessity. If you want to maintain separate lives, I understand. We can be married in name only. Valeera silenced him by pressing a finger to his lips. Darren, you just flew into an enemy flagship, infected it with an impossible virus, and saved my entire species. That's not political necessity. That's heroism.
I had help. Stop being modest. I told you it doesn't suit you. She moved closer. Kael chose you because he saw something special. I'm beginning to see it too.
What do you see?
Someone brave enough to face the impossible. Someone loyal enough to honor a friend's dying wish. Someone crazy enough to marry an alien princess and actually try to make it work. When you put it like that, I sound almost impressive.
You are impressive, in your chaotic, human way. She paused.
I don't know if this marriage will work. Our species are different. Our cultures are incompatible. And technically, we barely know each other.
But I'd like to try, if you're willing. Darren looked at her. This alien princess who'd been forced into his life by circumstances neither of them had chosen. She was beautiful, brilliant, and absolutely nothing like anyone he'd ever known. "I'm willing," he said, "but I should warn you. I'm a terrible husband. I drink too much. I make bad jokes at inappropriate times, and I have a tendency to get into life-threatening situations. I've noticed. It's oddly endearing." She smiled. "Besides, I'm not exactly ideal wife material either. I'm stubborn, politically minded, and I have the entire Theixian nobility watching my every move." "Sounds like we're perfect for each other." "Perfectly mismatched, perhaps?" They stood there, two beings from different worlds, bound by law and circumstance, and maybe